Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Mid-Level Media channel, your hub for everything physical media and entertainment. I am Ken. Today, guys, we're going to be reviewing 1982, the greatest geek year ever. This is a new Blu-ray release from MVD Rewind Collection, which I just love the Rewind Collection, guys. This is right here, Spine. Can you guys see it? Spine number 61. So they're already up to 61. I remember when this line started. I think it was 2017, 2018. I think they started with Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I've been collecting for them pretty much since the very beginning, but this is one of their more recent ones. They put it out on November the 5th. It is going for a price of $25.98. So I wasn't planning on doing a review for this Blu-ray release, but then I watched it. I watched it on a whim. I'm like, let me just watch this, check it out. I like stuff that breaks down movies by year. I just find that fascinating because I do shorts about that all the time on the channel, guys. I like that kind of stuff. I like looking at a specific year and just examining the movies that came out, who was directing what movies at that time, who was starring in what movies at that time, the themes of the movies that came out in that year. There's a lot you can draw from examining like a year in cinema. So I just think that that's really cool, and I love making shorts about that and really diving into that kind of stuff. And I'm pretty good when it comes to like movie release dates. You tell me a movie and I can pretty much, as long as it's a movie that I'm familiar with, can tell you what year it came out. So I decided to watch this. I'm like, it'll be like an hour and a half, pretty quick, easy watch, and I'll be interested in it because I like this kind of stuff. Turned it on, almost 3 hours long, and then I found out that this was a mini series that came out on the CW channel back in the day. I think it was a 4-part mini series. I think it aired back in 2022, and now they're putting it out on physical media. So cool that we got a TV mini series that is put out on physical media. That is cool as well. But this is about 3 hours long. I was like, oh my goodness, 3 hours long. But then I just couldn't stop watching it. I was so like into this like the entire time. Like it flew by, like 3 hours flew by because again, I like this kind of stuff. I kind of compare this to the In Search of Darkness documentaries, if you're familiar with those, part 1 and part 2. Actually, I think there's 3 of those at this point, but they examine like the 80s, and the only one that I have seen, 80s horror in particular, the only one that I've seen is the first one, and that one just kind of breaks down like each year, just goes through each year. It's 4 hours long, but I loved it. I was completely wrapped up in it when I watched it. But I can compare this to that, only instead of tackling a specific genre and a decade, this tackles 1982 and everything that came out in 1982. Not everything that came out in 1982, but most of it, and they really cover a lot of the bases. Like the last 20 minutes of this, like it says greatest geek year ever. So that would indicate that, and I'm just getting into this, guys. We're just going to review it right here. That would indicate that they're just going to talk about like the nerdy films, like the geeky films, your Star Treks and The Thing and Blade Runner, stuff like that. But they dive into everything. They really get into everything. They don't devote like a lot to the horror genre, at least I think as much as some people might have wanted. But again, that's what In Search of Darkness is for. Like if you want those deeper cuts in the horror genre, go check out those. Like this really just examines the entire year, and they even dive into like the Oscar stuff in the last 20 minutes, which I thought put a nice like cap on the end of this, just getting into the more serious films that came out in this particular year. But the panel, like this is a bunch of, this is kind of like your typical talking heads, like everybody's going around, they're giving their thoughts on each movie as they talk about them. But not just talking heads, not just people that weren't involved in the production. They actually bring in like actors that were involved in movies, in some cases directors that were involved in these movies. They actually give people with like insights, an opportunity to talk and give their story on like the movies, which adds an extra layer, I think. And you could tell the people that did this documentary were extremely connected in the world of Hollywood, because some of the people they got William Shatner to come in here and talk about Wrath of Khan. So you also had people like Ron Howard in this talking about Night Shift with Michael Keaton. Also, you had the Fonz, and Henry Winkler himself was in this. So you had Keith David, like you had Dee Wallace, like you had people that were actually involved in these movies that were in this documentary, which just added an extra layer, I think, to its credibility. Now, you also had people that I remember from like the Collider and Screen Junkie days on here, like Scott Mance and Robert Meyer Barnett, which I still watch Robert Meyer Barnett because he actually is super into physical media and talks about that quite frequently on his channel. But they had all kinds of interesting people on here talking about these movies, in addition to the actors and some of the directors as well. So it was a really great, just comprehensive look at the year of 1982. And the only thing I could think of when I was done watching this, I was like, damn, I want this. I want this for like every year. Can we get this for every year? But I actually heard that they're working on 1984, which next to 1982, like I think 1984 is one of the greatest years of all time. I always talk about that year as being one of the greatest because so many great movies in that year. Ghostbusters, like The Karate Kid, you got Purple Rain in that year, Nightmare on Elm Street. There's so many iconic movies in 1984. But 1982, like when they really sat down and examined it, I was like, yeah, I could see the case for this one being the greatest year of the 80s as well. But 1984, I think, is a close competitor to 1982, if it doesn't beat it. So I would love to see that, just an examination of 1984. But I think you could do one of these for every year of the 80s because there's so many iconic years. 1985 is a phenomenal year as well, and 87 is a great year, but I would love to see this for every year. Like that would be my dream. So somebody get on it, fast track these, start putting them out for like every year of the 80s, the 90s. You go back to the 70s and do them as well. I just like this kind of stuff. I think it's really cool. And they really stay focused on the movies themselves. They dive into other forms of pop culture at the time as well, but they really try to stay focused on the movies, which I definitely appreciate it. But I do highly recommend this, like as a movie. If there's another way to watch it, I don't know if it's still on, if it's on streaming anywhere or not, but I do recommend this Blu-ray. But if you can find some other way, I just recommend that you watch this. But this is a really good release. Blu-ray quality wise, guys, it looked good. But you also have a lot of good special features here. You got an audio commentary. I think you have a couple of audio commentaries with this. You have a commentary with the director and the writer. You have a commentary with Scott Mantz and Thomas P. Littell and Mark A. Altman. You got deleted extended scenes. So I think that's like 40 minutes of extra interviews and stuff that they had to cut for this. From what I understand, like they got a lot more footage than what they included here. Like it probably could have been like 5 or 6 hours long. You got the fan speak, fan favorites, films, featurettes, and you got the 2022 San Diego Comic-Con panel, trailer, double-sided artwork. Let me show you off this edition real quick, guys. I love the artwork right there. Freaking incredible. You flip to the back. You got the synopsis. All that stuff. But they even dive into the E.T. video game as well. And you open this up. You got some nice disc arts. You got a poster right here. Bam. I love that they include the poster. I've already unboxed this on the channel before, but this is the unboxing after I actually watched it. But take the disc out. You got some cool like interior artwork of like a kid's room from the 80s. But yeah, guys, what the other thing I wanted to do with this video, because I'm like, you know what? I like diving into years and examining the movies. And I thought to myself, you know what? Wouldn't it be cool if I showed off my own 1982 movie collection? So I brought over every film from my collection from 1982, and we're going to run through all these movies just so I can kind of hammer home the fact that 1982 really is one of the strongest years for film, because I got a lot of the big movies in my collection. Now, there's a couple of ones that I do not have in the collection, but what I wanted to do is split it into two parts. I've got movies that I've seen. I've got movies that I haven't seen that I have in the collection from 1982. And as we go, we'll talk about things that were brought up in this documentary. So I just thought this would be a fun addition to the review of 1982, the greatest geek year ever. And let's start off with an absolute banger from 1982, Supernatural Ghost Story, produced by Steven Spielberg, also directed by Tobe Hooper. We have Poltergeist, and I've got the 4K edition. You're going to see some cool additions as I go through this, guys, but this, of course, is the slipcover Warner Brothers edition that not a lot of people were super fans of this artwork. It's even got the warning sticker right there because in 4K, the whole TV flashing sequence can really put you in like epileptic shock from watching it if you're susceptible to that kind of stuff. But what I love about this documentary is that they actually dive into one of film's biggest debates, and that is who directed this film really? Was it Steven Spielberg or was it Tobe Hooper? And Dee Wallace pretty much confirms in this, and I don't think we've heard anywhere else, like at least like concrete, like who directed this movie, like who was responsible for the big decisions of this film. This movie really dives into that in a way that I've never really heard before. But D. Wallace really confirms that Steven Spielberg was there like pretty much every day, and he was giving Tobe Hooper direction. Now, when I watch this movie, you 100% see the influence of Steven Spielberg, 100%. In this film, but you also do see some influence from Tobe Hooper as well in this movie. So I think that this is just a good combination of both of the directors, and it's kind of like they both directed the movie, even though Tobe Hooper really was under the guidance of Spielberg, which by all accounts, like Tobe Hooper just had too much respect for Steven Spielberg to really push back when he was on set. So I think this is really kind of the perfect blend of both of those directors and their styles, because you can absolutely see the Tobe Hooper influence in this movie for sure. Like there's some really like good sequences of horror in this film that I don't think that Spielberg by himself could have pulled off without Hooper. So I think it's kind of the perfect combination of both, and that's why this movie is so damn good and so revered all these years later. But Poltergeist is a classic, but I love how they kind of dove into that and really kind of settled it in my mind. Like it wasn't Tobe Hooper all the way, it wasn't Spielberg all the way. It was kind of a collaboration of both. So Poltergeist on 4K, guys, one of the greatest movies of the 80s for sure, definitely of 1982. They also talked about E.T., and I like this documentary, guys, because it is 3 hours long. They really gave these movies time to breathe, time to talk about them. Like it didn't feel rushed. Like at least the movies that you wanted them to talk about, and some that I had never really even heard of, they dove into for a good length of time. Now there was a few that they kind of breezed over. I would have liked them to go a little bit longer on, but we'll get to those in my collection here in a second. But E.T., they definitely spent a lot of time on because this was like the big movie. I think this is the highest box office film of 1982. A lot of people think it should have won Best Picture. It was nominated for Best Picture. Of course, directed by Steven Spielberg. And the reason he couldn't direct Poltergeist was this movie because he had a contract with Universal and he couldn't direct the movie for another studio, which Poltergeist is Warner Brothers. So E.T., one of my personal favorite movies of all time. It's probably in my top 5. I love this film so much. So this is definitely one of the best films of that year. And what are you going to say about E.T.? The John Williams score, iconic. I just love this movie. I love the way it makes me feel. It transports me back to my childhood. Just absolutely love it 100%. So E.T., that came out in 1982, guys. We've also got Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which they have a great section of the documentary talking about this movie and its importance. And I kind of echo everything that they said in this documentary, how this movie is a comedy, but it's more of a dramatic film as well. And it's really like raw, realistic portrait of teen life in the early 80s. So this movie hit me like really hard the last time I watched it in a way that it did not when I first watched it back when I was like 15 or 16. But it's such a great movie. If you haven't seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, it's definitely one of the best movies of the 80s. Now I have this Criterion Blu-ray edition because this movie is not on 4K just yet. And next up, we got the 4K of The Thing. And I'll go ahead and bring this up. We got the 4K of Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. So why I bring these two up at the same time is because I think I've talked about this on the channel before, but these movies came out on the same day in 1982. Like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine like having two of the most iconic movies of all time, certainly of the 80s, come out on the same damn day? And guess what? They bombed at the box office on the very same day because they came out like, I think, 2 weeks after E.T. did. It was June something of 1982. 2 weeks after E.T. and E.T. was still just like blowing it away at the box office. And they both did not do great. They both did not do great for differing reasons. Like The Thing, people just didn't get at the time. And Blade Runner, like people just weren't into this movie back when it first came out. They weren't into the narration. It wasn't until Ridley Scott came in and did the director's cut and then finally the final cut that people really started to latch on to this film, at least in the mainstream. I'm sure there was fans of the movie back when it came out, but two iconic movies of the 80s came out on the same day and they both bombed. So they really dive into both of these films very well. So these are both great movies for sure. But yeah, really good section. It would have been nice to have John Carpenter, here, and Ridley Scott to talk about these two movies, but they, of course, are just too big of names to make it to talk about him here. But the 4Ks of both of those are fantastic as well. We have Swamp Thing, and this was directed by Wes Craven. I always forget about that. Now, I reviewed this last year on the channel. This is a great 4K from MVD Rewind as well. This is a part of their Laser Vision line. I think this was number 1 in that new line. They need to come out with a new 4K. It's been a little bit. I think since Ghoulies 2 that they did one, but really good addition, really good movie. I like how they really kind of dove into the costume that the guy had to wear in the movie and how it was really a pain in the ass for him to have to wear that all day, and it was very hot. And they go into all the complications that Wes had to deal with as well, making this film with the studio. So that was a really interesting part of the documentary. Also, we've got Halloween 3. Who doesn't love Halloween 3, guys? Season of the Witch. We didn't love it when it came out. Okay, I didn't love it in my childhood, but like people have really come around on this movie now, even with it being without Michael Myers. But they had a good portion of the documentary where they talked about that as well, and that's the Scream Factory 4K. We've also I've got the Rocky, I think, Knockout Collection. Now there's an Ultimate Knockout Collection as well, but specifically Rocky 3 right there. And this was a great year for Stallone. Where is, because I don't have this next here, but we've got First Blood and we've got Rocky 3. Both came out the same damn year, and they had a great part on both of these. Like, they gave both of these time to breathe and kind of talk about them as well, talking about how Rocky 3 was really kind of the superhero Rocky film, and that kind of led to the superhero era of Rocky and Rocky 4. And they talk about First Blood and how it's super underrated, which I 100% agree. I said before, First Blood might be like pound for pound the best movie of the 80s. I think it might be the best movie of the 80s, and I think it's also Sylvester Stallone's best and most powerful performance. But I love both of these films. Rocky 3 is one of my favorite Rockies. It might be like number 2 in my ranking. Like, I love it that much. Mr. T is so freaking great as a villain. But I love both these films. I love Sly, and I love it that he had 2 like bangers in 1982. Now, the next one I'm going to show off, if you like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, this is really like a more cult version of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's certainly a lot dirtier and a lot sleazier and a lot grimier than Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but that's the Last American Virgin, and this is actually from MVD Rewind as well. This is Spine number 47. I think this one came out at the beginning of 2023, but this movie actually blew me away. Like, I really loved it. It's such a dark portrayal. Like, I talked about Fast Times at Ridgemont High and said that it really tapped into the realistic, raw nature of being a teenager in the early 80s. This dives into the darker aspects of it. Like, the movie itself is played to be a little bit more lighthearted. It's played for laughs, but some of the things that happen in the movie, I'm like, damn, like that's raunchy and not good. Like that's very dark. But the soundtrack in this is so great as well. You got all the bands right there on the side. That's very cool. But yeah, if you like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, you'll definitely like the Last American Virgin. It's a great film from 1982. We've also got diving into the more nerdy stuff. We've got Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan right here, this 4K edition, which is a really good Star Trek film. Like, I'm not the biggest Star Trek fan, but this is probably the best Star Trek movie, I would say, for sure. And they definitely talk about that quite a bit in this documentary. We've got another cult horror film from the 80s right here. We've got The Slumber Party Massacre, which I love this movie for sure. They talk a good bit about this film, how it was directed by a female. They talked about the drill and the driller killer and how the drill was kind of a metaphor for a penis and how that was really profound through the female gaze of a female director. So it was a really good piece on this movie. But yeah, I love Slumber Party Massacre. I've actually ordered the 4K set of both this one and the second one from 101 Films. So I'm looking forward to getting that one in very soon. But this is the old Scream Factory Blu-ray edition right here. Cat People. This is a film directed by Paul Schrader, which Paul Schrader talks in this documentary as well, which was very cool. But this is definitely not one of my favorite Paul Schrader movies. He did this one a couple of years after American Gigolo, also 3 years after Hardcore. So he was kind of on a roll. I didn't remember loving Cat People, but I'll be honest, the way that they talked about this movie made me want to revisit it for sure. So maybe I'll check this one out again. at some point. That's the 4K from Scream Factory. Creep Show. Now, this is one of the best horror films of the 80s. I don't think they gave this movie enough time for sure in the documentary. I would have liked for them to go a little bit deeper into Creep Show, but this is the great Blu-ray Scream Factory edition, the hardbox case right there, which I do love. But yeah, if you like horror anthologies, like this is one of the best ever, in my opinion. Directed by George A. Romero. All the stories are written by Stephen King. It's like a match made in heaven right there for Creep Show. We've got 48 Hours, which I've said this before, like I think this is better than Beverly Hills Cop. Like this might be my favorite Eddie Murphy movie of the 80s. It's directed by Walter Hill, who also did The Warriors. So many great films Walter Hill is responsible for, but I love 48 Hours. I love the chemistry between him and Eddie Murphy. I love how it's not totally a comedy. There are some more serious, dramatic aspects of the film as well. And I just think that bar scene, which they talk about in the documentary with Eddie Murphy, is like one of the best scenes of the 80s, one of the best scenes with Eddie Murphy in it. But I love 48 Hours. It's definitely one of my favorites. Nick Nolte is great in the movie as well. And that's the 4K from Paramount. They also talked about Conan a good deal as well, which I reviewed this 4K earlier this year. This is the Arrow Video edition of Conan the Barbarian, but this is a great movie. I really enjoyed this one, and I enjoyed Conan the Destroyer as well. And for this one, they really dive into the director and how he really pushed to get Arnold into this role, and how Dino De Laurentiis, sorry guys, I didn't think of his name for a second, did not want Arnold. He didn't want Arnold because he had a different accent, and he didn't think he was right for Conan. And it was funny because he's like, should I just get Dustin Hoffman then to play Conan? He was like, quit being a smart ass. He goes, okay, I'm just going to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to do the role because he looks the part, which he absolutely did. And it was one of the best decisions that was ever made in cinema, because this movie kind of kicked the doors open for Arnold Schwarzenegger to become the mega action superstar of the 80s and 90s that he would become. So Conan the Barbarian, great film for sure. Great fantasy epic. Now we've also got right here, this is some of the more lower tier horror films that came out in 1982 that's in my collection. We've got Friday the 13th Part 2, which I don't think this is the best Friday the 13th, not by a long shot. Like this is probably maybe like number 7, number 8 for me in my Friday the 13th ranking, but it's a fun Friday, and it's the first Friday where Jason gets his hockey mask, so it's at least iconic for that. Now this is the Paramount Steelbook of Friday the 13th Part 3. With Be Right Back on the back of it. We've also got Basket Case that came out in 1982. They didn't talk about Basket Case in the entire documentary, not at all, which I was kind of disappointed by, because I think this is a really good Frank Henenlotter movie that I just watched for the first time in 4K this year. I actually got a review for this 4K up on the channel. But yeah, really, really fun movie. I like this one a lot, so I was kind of disappointed they didn't talk about Basket Case. We got Death Screams, and we've got Deadly Games. These are both Arrow Video releases. I did a video earlier this year talking about the worst and the best of Arrow Video, and these are both on my worst. So these are two movies from 1982 that were probably best to be left off of the documentary and not talked about, because they're not very good slasher horror films from the 80s, in my opinion. Again, it's always my opinion, guys. We got Mortuary. Now, this is one of the first films with Bill Paxton in it. This predates Weird Science, so I think this is a pretty creepy, atmospheric horror film for sure, with a twist at the end that you kind of see coming, but don't really see coming. And I recommend Mortuary. This is another MVD Rewind edition right here. We're showing off a lot of MVD Rewind editions to go along with this MVD Rewind of 1982, guys. We've also got House on Sorority Row, which is also an MVD Rewind. I enjoyed this one okay. It's not great, though. I don't really remember it too much, if I'm being honest. Girls Night Out. This one is another kind of like stupid, low-budget slasher film, but I actually think this one's kind of fun. It's about a teddy bear that goes around killing people. Somebody dressed up like a teddy bear killing young ladies. So it's a fun one. I recommend Girls Night Out. I thought that one was a pretty good time. This last one I'm going to show off of the ones that I've seen, then we'll get into the stuff I haven't seen. This is a banger. This is one of the best movies of 1982 for sure. And I wish they would have talked about this in the documentary, but they did not, because I think there's a few people on that panel that could have dove into it. But Dario Argento's Tenebrae is 100% one of my favorite giallo films, one of my favorite horror movies, and one of my favorite movies of the 80s and 1982. This is a great addition from Synops Films. Look at that, guys. It's so beautiful. So freaking beautiful. I want to watch this movie again right now. This to me is like the standard when it comes to giallo films. Such a beautiful box set from Synops Films. So that's all the ones that I've seen. Now, these are the ones that I need to check out. Some of these you've heard of. Some of these are pretty big movies. Some of these, not so much. Some of these are more cult horror films. But I brought over my Grease collection because I haven't seen Grease 2, which is right there, which also came out in 1982. We've also got One Dark Night that came out in 1982. That's another MVD Rewind edition. Have not seen that. We've got Homework. This is an Unearthed Films Blu-ray. I just got this one recently. So this is a, I believe, sex comedy from the 80s. I have not seen this one. We've got Raw Force, this is a Vinegar Syndrome release, which I've actually heard some good things about this. What's the synopsis of this one? Welcome to Warriors Island, burial ground of disgraced martial arts masters. So yeah, I have not seen Raw Force, but I need to check that one out at some point. We've got a Chuck Norris film, Silent Rage. This is the Mill Creek Retro VHS edition. I have not seen Silent Rage. I bought this at Walmart. It had to have been 2018. I bought this. Had to have been 2018. And I've still not watched it. I've heard such great things about it. I've heard it's kind of like a slasher horror film, so I need to watch Silent Rage at some point. Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. They did bring this one up slightly in the documentary, but they didn't talk on it too much. This is a Steve Martin black and white comedy from 1982. That's a Kino Lorber edition. I just got this one from Severin a couple of months ago, but the last horror film. And this one has, God, what is his name? Joe Spinell? Is that his name? Joe Spinell is in this film, the same guy from Maniac. So I need to check this one out at some point. But a really beautiful edition of the last horror film for sure. We've also got Alone in the Dark. Heard good things about Alone in the Dark. I played the video game on PlayStation back in the day, but and I think I saw the movie adaptation that came out. That was not very good. But this one I've actually heard is pretty good. This is the Scream Factory Blu-ray of this one, so I'll have to check that one out. We also got a Lucio Fulci film, The New York Ripper. So yeah, I've heard some nasty, disgusting things about this film. So this is the 4K from Blue Underground, so I need to check this one out at some point. Death Wish 2. I watched Death Wish, the first one, for the first time last year. Did a 4K review, but I need to check out Death Wish 2. Now, they do have a 4K of this, I think still from Vinegar Syndrome, unless it's sold out, but I've just got this Blu-ray from MGM as of right now. I don't know why this is in my unwatched stack, because I have seen this, but Class of 1984 is actually a really good movie. I enjoyed this one a lot. The beginning of it, like, kind of felt like afternoon special type stuff. But like the last 30 minutes really sold me on the movie. I actually thought the movie was kind of badass after those last 30 minutes. So Class of 1984, and it's got Michael J. Fox in it. So this is a very early performance for Michael J. Fox. I think around the same time, he must have started doing Family Ties around this time. But Class of 84, definitely recommend that one. We have The Entity, which this one actually released in the UK in 1982, but in the States in 1983. I'll still count it as a 1982 film, but yeah, we have The Entity right here, guys. The Entity. And we also have Gandhi. This is the movie that won Best Picture in 1982. This is the 4K from the Columbia Classic set that I have. And I will admit it right now, I have not seen Gandhi. I have not watched that 4K. I think the movie's like 4 hours long. So that's probably why I have not seen Gandhi as of this time. And I do want to bring this up real quick because they talked about this movie as being 1982. But again, kind of how I discussed with The Entity, it came out in Australia in 1981. Then it came out in the States in 1982. But The Road Warrior with Mel Gibson, they talked about as being 1982. I consider it 1981 because it came out in Australia for them theatrically in 1981. So I'm not talking about that one here in this video. We've also got The Secret of Nymph, which I have not seen this movie. This is a Don Bluth film from 1982. I think I found this at a Walmart for like $5 in the $5 bin. So I need to check that out at some point. We've also got The King of Comedy. This is a Martin Scorsese film that I am kicking myself every single day as to why I have not watched this yet. I need to. It's one of the big Martin Scorsese movies that I have not seen. I'm pretty much seen every other big Scorsese film, except for King of Comedy. So I need to watch that one at some point. We've also got Tron. Don't ask me how I haven't seen Tron, but I haven't seen Tron. The way they talked about this movie, though, like, I really wanted to watch Tron when it's over with. I hope this gets a 4K. I'm kind of holding out for the 4K, but I just need to go ahead and break down and watch this Blu-ray. I think I got this one from Best Buy, like right before Best Buy went into not selling physical media anymore, for like $5 last year, I think. We've also got Annie. I got this as a part of the Columbia Classics Volume 3 edition. But yeah, Classic Annie from 1982. This is a big one. This is directed by Don Coscarelli. This is Beastmaster. I need to check out Beastmaster. This is a VSU edition. I love my VSUs. And this is Spy number 1. So this is the first VSU edition they ever did. Look at this thing, guys. I love these editions. If you haven't seen these before, you open this up. You got a nice slipcover on the inside. You got artwork on the inside. You got a booklet on the inside. And it's just really nice. So I need to check out my Beastmaster edition sooner rather than later. And we've got 3 DVDs last. One of them is Diner. Somebody actually sent this to me in a subscriber unboxing, I think like a year or so ago. And I need to check this out. It's got Steve Guttenberg. It's got Daniel Stern, Mickey Rourke. It's got a great cast. Kevin Bacon's in this film. And a lot of people were talking about it in the documentary and saying it was a great film. So I need to watch Diner at some point. We've also got a Tom Hanks movie, Mazes and Monsters. And they talked about this one, saying this is the movie that really exposed like Dungeons and Dragons to parents, and basically kind of turned them on to the fact that it was a front for devil worshiping, which of course it wasn't. But that's what a lot of people thought, especially after Mazes and Monsters came out. They were like more enlightened to the fact that Dungeons and Dragons was not very good for their children to be playing. So yeah, I don't really know if this movie was trying to be a commentary on that and how the game was bad for kids, but Mazes and Monsters, Tom Hanks, one of Tom Hanks' early films right there. And then lastly, we have Night Shift with Michael Keaton and also Henry Winkler, directed by Ron Howard. So I think this was Ron Howard's like second or third movie, maybe fourth film. But they actually talk about this one quite a bit. And they were talking about, and I never made the connection because Ron Howard was on Happy Days. So was Henry Winkler. So that's why they were both involved in this movie. But this is one that I hear about all the time. This is a Snapper Case DVD edition right here, guys. Now this has a Warner Archive Blu-ray, but I'm probably going to check this out on the DVD edition at some point. And again, I've heard incredible things about the movie, so I definitely need to check that one out. But there you have it, guys. That's my review of the... Let me bring this back out, guys, because I buried it. 1982, the greatest geek year ever. And I also showed off my 1982 Blu-ray and 4K collection. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, comment down below your thoughts on this documentary if you've seen it. Also, what's your favorite film from 1982? Your favorite, your top 5, your top 10? Let me know in that comment section below. And we'll see you next time.